How's it going, everybody? We are celebrating Easter, and man, Easter is an awesome time of year where we get to celebrate just Jesus's resurrection from the dead, why we have life. And I'm going to start off today with talking about some things that you might think, what does this have to do with Easter? But just hang on with me for just a little bit, and we'll get there. So let me ask you this question. Have you ever played Monopoly? Some of you immediately are like, yes, I have 15 different versions of it. I love that game. Some of you are like, no, I played that game one time and it took forever. Like it felt like we started at 9 a.m. and by midnight we were halfway through the game. And so let me ask you this question. Have you ever done anything else or been a part of something else that felt like it took forever? So pause this video right now, talk about a time or a situation where you thought it would never end and it was going to go forever. Pause this video right now. So some of us would say, man, I would choose this. If this could happen every day, 24/7, 365, I would want this to happen. I would want this to continue to happen forever. So with the people around you, I'm going to throw out a couple ideas. And if you're like, yes, I would want this to happen every day for the rest of my life and it couldn't change, then I want you to stand up. And if you're like, no, I wouldn't want that to happen forever for 24/7 all year, then stay seated, okay? Or raise your hand if you're feeling lazy. It's up to you. So if you would choose sunny weather, so like every single day for the rest of your life, it would always be sunny. Some of you in the room are like, yes, because you love that. Some of you are like, no, I got to have my rainy days where I can just sleep and then watch Netflix and then sleep some more and then eat and then repeat that cycle, right? All right, so sunny skies. What about thunderstorms? Like every day it would thunderstorm. Some of you are probably like, well, would it last all day or would it last just a few hours? We're going to say all day thunderstorms. Maybe no one raised your hand. Maybe someone did raise their hand. All right, what about this? You could only have spicy food forever, the rest of your life, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, spicy food. Any takers on that one? What about taking slow walks on a trail or taking a trail? So every day you'd have to do that. Some of you are like, yes, I love walking. Some of you are like, no, that sounds miserable. What about naps? I think everybody could agree that having a nap a day for the rest of our lives wouldn't be such a bad idea, right? What about brand new shoes? So every day you get a brand new pair of shoes. Some of you are like, yes, sign me up right away. I know that for me, yes, I would, because I like my shoes clean. It is what it is. Anyway, only in our dreams do we typically have this endless idea of sunny days or brand new shoes or spicy food or whatever it is. But today we're going to actually talk about how we can have some things forever. Some things forever. Maybe not all the things we just listed, but definitely at least a couple of things that we want to. Life at times, though, if we think about it, can be fast-paced. It can be chaotic. And sometimes that chaos is fun, but when our chaos, like when we bounce between friends, like, oh, I'm going to this house, we're going to, like during the summer when you're hanging out at so many different houses, that kind of chaotic thing can stress your parents out, but for you, it's incredible, right? Like between experiences, new experiences, activities, like chaotic can be good, but at other times, chaos can leave us feeling like defeated and even sometimes like hopeless. Like when chaos is stumbling from one disappointment to another disappointment, or one loss to another loss, or a frustration to another frustration. And sometimes life leaves us like we can't even catch our breath, or we can't even catch a break. So what do we do in those difficult moments? Who can help us? And this is where Jesus is found. This is where we can turn to Him to help us when we are consumed maybe with hopelessness. And maybe Easter seems like a little strange time to be talking about chaos and talking about hopelessness. After all, we should be celebrating that Jesus rose from the dead. And of course we should, and of course we will. But the good news of Easter, it can't help us in the middle of our darkest moments, if it can't, like, then is it really good news? And so pause this video and ask this question real fast. What are some reasons why a person might feel hopeless? Like, why would people feel hopeless? Pause this video and ask that question. So I remember for me a couple years ago, 2018, I was sitting in a hospice center with my grandmother. And for some of you that don't know what that is, hospice is just essentially a place where people go to live out their final days. They make them comfortable. They make sure that they're feeling okay. And it's, it can be like a sad place. And I remember one night the doctors called my parents in and my aunt and uncle, and they thought she was going to pass away that night. And so they came in at like midnight, and at 9 o'clock she was still alive. And so I called that morning and said, "Hey, can I help you? Is there anything I can do?" And they said, "Hey, we've been up all night. Can you come just sit with your grandmother?" And so I drove to Burlington and I sat with her. And it was just this hopeless feeling of like, there's nothing I can do to help her. She's literally slowly passing away. And I just felt in that moment this sense of sadness, this sense of frustration, anger. I was hopeless. And if we look at the events around Jesus' death and resurrection, many of Jesus' followers were probably full of doubts and questions and fears, and rightfully so. They probably felt hopeless. And their leader and Savior, like he had just been killed on a cross, and their lives were probably very chaotic. And we see just a couple people like Peter, who denied Jesus. He needed courage, and he needed clarity to help him put his trust in him. You look at Thomas, who had to have proof that Jesus actually rose again. You look at Mary Magdalene, who couldn't fathom that Jesus could possibly be alive, needed comfort and hope because of her sadness. And today we're going to look specifically at some of those stories, and how the very first Easter doesn't just address our doubts. It actually gives us the power to have hope, and maybe not some obvious ways. So let's look at first Mary Magdalene. She was one of Jesus' most devoted followers. Jesus had saved her from so much, gave her new purpose, gave her new direction. And so when he died, you could imagine how devastated she was. And the scriptures talks about Mary's tears 4 times in just a few verses. So what I want you to do is pause this video, read John chapter 20, verses 1 through 13. Man, if you can just capture that moment, Mary was experiencing deep hopelessness. Like, she had already lost her dear friend once, but now that his body was gone, it's like she felt she lost him again. And sometimes when we find ourselves experience deep, aching kind of hopelessness, it's tough to see like what's right in front of us. And in our grief, we feel lost or confused or uncertain. And in those moments of uncertainty, that's when Jesus began to speak to Mary. So pause this video, read John chapter 20, verses 11 through 18. So, question for you. Who is someone that you would recognize anywhere? Like, if they just rolled up, you'd be like, oh, I know who they are. Maybe a mom or dad. Maybe you're picturing a face right now of a friend. If they walk through the door right now, you would recognize them instantly, right? Of course you would. And that's what I find so interesting about this story. Like, Mary assumed someone had stolen his body, because what else could explain that her dear friend wasn't in the tomb anymore? And overcome with grief, Mary wept. And as she cried, someone came up and asked, "Why are you crying?" And she thought the voice belonged to the gardener. But when the man said her name, she realized, wait, that's Jesus. Like, that was Jesus. He is alive. And so Mary didn't recognize Jesus or the hope that he was about to give her. But guess what? Jesus didn't give up on her. Jesus wasn't angry with Mary for not seeing what was right in front of her. He was actually gentle and kind. And Jesus didn't pull away from Mary because she didn't recognize him. He stayed with her. He called her by name, and he waited for her to see him. And sometimes in our hopelessness, it can keep us from recognizing that Jesus is present with us. Like Jesus is present and he is with us. But when we're finally able to see that Jesus is with us, even in our darkest moments, our hopelessness can actually turn into hope. Like, let me ask you this question. Have you ever been in like a really bad fog, like foggy weather or a blizzard where you couldn't even see in front of you, or you're driving and you have to go super slow, hazard lights on? Or maybe have you ever had swimmer's ear, or maybe like an ear infection, and it's so frustrating because you want to hear and you're trying to get it out, and it just feels like there's discomfort and pain and you can barely hear anybody? Or have you ever lost track of your friends and family in a crowd because you were so distracted by what other people were doing or where other people were going? Like, you looked up and all of a sudden you didn't know where you were or where the people you were with you. Sometimes it happens with us, those moments with Jesus too, right? Like when we face really difficult things, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that Jesus is actually with us. And other times we really can't hear or understand what Jesus is trying to say to us because the discomfort and pain that we are experiencing. And sometimes we feel hopelessness because we forget to even look at Jesus because we're preoccupied or distracted. And as I was sitting back with my grandmother a few years ago and just feeling this hopelessness and sadness, and as a sense, you're just waiting for them to pass away, which is terrible to say, I began to remember going into my grandmother's restroom. And I know that sounds weird, but hold on. While we were at her house, I would go in there, and there was this massive Bible behind the toilet. And I was like, that's odd. But I remember many times picking it up and just turning through it, and so many notes and so many like highlighted parts. And I began to remember the times that she would sit down and encourage me. I worked at her church for a while, and she would tell me how great a job I was doing. And I would see her show up consistently every week to church, and began to think of these memories, and then remembering her tell me about how she came to know Jesus and how that she loved him more than anything. And it brought to mind that, hey, one day, like, I'm going to see her again. Like, one day, I'm going to get to experience heaven with her. And then it brought me to this realization that, hey, this moment sucks right now, but there's hope. Because soon she's going to experience the greatest thing in the entire planet, universe, world, anything. She's going to be able to be face to face with Jesus. And guess what? That brought me hope. And like Mary Magdalene, Jesus calls us out of a hopeless state and into hope with him. And here's the hard part sometimes, though, right? We often feel hopeless. And Jesus doesn't show up. Jesus went to see his disciples after his life was restored, but not everyone was there and not everyone saw him. And so Thomas, another guy we're talking about, wasn't there, and he didn't get to see Jesus. And so for him, like, he can't picture this guy that he saw dead now alive. And so let's read John chapter 20, verses 24 through 29. Pause this video right now. See, Thomas did eventually get to see Jesus, but it didn't happen right away. Thomas sat with uncertainty, with confusion and doubt for 8 days. And 8 days doesn't seem a long time, but it is a long time. Like, can you remember where you were 8 days ago? Like, just think about that. Some of you are like, you're hurting yourself thinking about this. Does 8 days maybe from now seem really far away? Like when you're waiting for a vacation, you're like, oh man, 8 days away, it seems forever. But imagine how long it would feel if you were waiting and hoping and wondering if you would get to see Jesus and he was alive, and how disappointed you might be when those 7 days passed and you still haven't seen Jesus. And Jesus appears to Mary and Thomas. It gives us clues to the hope that we can find in Jesus. It's not temporary, here one day and gone the next day, but it's kind of hope that will help us through our doubt and uncertainty. It's a hope that's not based on his ability to conquer death, because if he can beat death, guess what? He can beat anything. There's nothing he can't do. It's a hope that's based in his great love for us. He loved us enough to die for us, and he loves us enough to show up and comfort us when we need a glimpse of hope. So when we feel hopeless, can we expect Jesus to show up in the flesh like he did with Mary and Thomas? Probably not, but there's a cool passage in the book of Ephesians that tells us what he actually can do for us. So pause this video, read Ephesians chapter 1, verse 18. So we might not be able to see Jesus with our physical eyes, but the eyes of our hearts can see the hope that Jesus offers. Like Mary and Thomas, our pain and hopelessness doesn't prevent us from seeing what's true, and that Jesus is really alive. That's why we celebrate Easter. He's alive, and guess what? His love gives us hope. Jesus' love gives us hope. So like Mary and Thomas, we are all prone to experience hopelessness sometimes. But our stories don't have to end in hopelessness. So what's going on in your life right now that makes you feel hopeless? Maybe for some of you, it's circumstances. Is it your circumstances? Life really difficult around you. You can't see the hope that is ahead. You feel like the whole world is crashing down around you. If that's you, remember Mary discovered that Jesus was with her before she even realized he was there. Jesus loves you so much, and he's with you right now, even though you might not feel it, even if you haven't noticed him yet. But let the love of Jesus give you hope right now. Maybe for some of you, it's doubts. Do you feel hopeless because you have doubts and questions that make you want to give up on believing in Jesus altogether? Or like Thomas, do you want to believe, but you need some help believing? If that's you, remember that he wanted to find Jesus, but it took 8 days. And so like Paul wrote in the book of Ephesians, as we saw, ask God to open your eyes of your heart so that you can see and find Jesus. Jesus loves you so much that he hasn't left you without evidence of himself. So let Jesus give you hope. Choices. Maybe for some of you, you are feeling hopeless because of the choices that you've made. Maybe bad mistakes, wrong mistakes, whatever it feels like you've dug yourself into this hole that you can't get out of. The best and most helpful news might be for you that Jesus loved you so much that he allowed himself to die and then conquer death for you. His death and resurrection gives you the ability to find freedom from sin and death, both in eternity and right now. So let the love of Jesus give you hope. And if you're not feeling hopeless right now, who do you know that might feel hopeless? That maybe you need to give the love of Jesus to so they can experience hope. Whether it's because of their circumstances, doubts, choices, chances are that you know someone who needs hope right now. So when they can't quite see Jesus with them, you can be a tangible expression of Jesus to them. And so I want you to remember, and what we celebrate at Easter is that Jesus is alive, and because he is alive, the love that he gives us brings us hope. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you guys later.